Charles Whitmore had spent 35 years building his technology empire, transforming a small startup into a company that employed thousands. At 58, he lived in a stately home that reflected his success: marble columns, manicured gardens, and wrought iron gates that spoke of a life well earned through dedication and hard work. Yet for all his achievements, Charles often found himself feeling strangely empty as he walked through the echoing halls of his grand house. His wife had passed 3 years earlier, and his grown children lived busy lives in distant cities. The house that once buzzed with family gatherings now felt more like a museum than a home. Elena Rodriguez had been his housekeeper for 2 years. She was 43, a quiet woman with gentle eyes and work-worn hands that spoke of a lifetime of caring for others. She had immigrated from Guatemala 20 years ago, working multiple jobs to support her elderly mother and put her own daughter through nursing school. Charles appreciated her reliability and attention to detail, though their interactions were always brief and professional. What Charles didn't know was that Elena had been carrying a secret weight in her heart. Each evening, as she prepared to leave his home, she would carefully package the untouched portions of his meals that could feed a family, but often went largely uneaten by a man who had lost his appetite for more than just food. On this particular autumn evening, Charles had returned early from a board meeting that had ended sooner than expected. As he pulled through his gates, his headlights swept across the front courtyard, and he noticed 2 figures near the entrance: Elena, still in her black uniform with its crisp white apron, and a small boy of perhaps 8 or 9 years old. Charles parked and stepped quietly from his car, something about the scene drawing his attention. The boy was thin, his clothes clean but worn, his shoes scuffed from many miles of walking. Elena was kneeling at his level, her face illuminated by the warm glow of the entrance lanterns, holding a brown paper bag. "Here you go, Miguel," Charles heard her say softly in accented English. "There's enough for you and your grandmother tonight. The chicken is still warm, and I packed some of those dinner rolls you like." The boy's face lit up with a smile that seemed to transform the entire evening. "Thank you, Miss Elena. Abuela will be so happy. She's been feeling better since you started bringing us the medicine money, too." Charles felt his chest tighten as he realized what he was witnessing. This wasn't simply about leftover food. This was about Elena using her own modest wages to help. This child and his grandmother going far beyond what anyone could expect. Elena reached into her purse and pulled out a small bottle. "This is for your grandmother's arthritis. Make sure she takes 1 pill with dinner, okay? And Miguel—" She paused, looking at the boy with maternal concern. "How are you doing in school? Are you keeping up with your reading?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm reading every night like you told me. The librarian says I'm getting much better." Charles watched from the shadows as Elena hugged the boy goodbye, her actions speaking of a care that went far beyond duty or obligation. This was love in action, he realized, quiet, consistent, and expecting nothing in return. After Miguel disappeared into the evening, Elena gathered her things and prepared to leave. Charles waited until she had gone before walking slowly to his front door, his mind churning with thoughts he hadn't expected. That night, Charles sat in his study, unable to concentrate on the financial reports spread across his mahogany desk. Instead, he found himself thinking about what he had witnessed. Here was a woman who earned a fraction of what he made in a day, yet she was using her resources to change lives. Meanwhile, he, with all his wealth and influence, had been so focused on business that he had missed opportunities for real impact right outside his own front door. The next morning, Charles did something unusual. Instead of leaving early for the office, he waited in his kitchen until Elena arrived. "Elena," he said gently as she began her morning routine. "Could we talk for a moment?" She looked up with concern, perhaps wondering if she had done something wrong. "Of course, Mr. Whitmore." Charles gestured to the breakfast table, inviting her to sit. something that had never happened in their 2 years of working together. "I came home early last night and saw you with a young boy. Miguel, I think you called him?" Elena's face flushed and she clasped her hands nervously. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have been using your property for personal business. It won't happen again." "Elena, please," Charles said, his voice warmer than she had ever heard it. "You misunderstand. I'm not concerned about you helping someone. I'm impressed. And I'm curious. Tell me about Miguel and his grandmother." Slowly, Elena shared their story. Miguel's parents had been killed in a car accident 2 years ago, leaving him in the care of his grandmother, Maria, who worked as a seamstress. Despite painful arthritis, they lived in a small apartment across town, struggling to make ends meet. Elena had met them at the clinic where she took her own mother for treatments. "I started bringing them food because—" Elena paused, searching for words. "Because Miguel reminds me of my own son at that age, you know? And his grandmother, she's so proud. She won't accept charity, but she'll accept food that would otherwise go to waste. It's different in her mind." Charles leaned back in his chair, processing this information. "The medicine you mentioned?" Elena looked down at her hands. "Maria needs medication for her arthritis, but it's expensive. I help when I can, but—" She shrugged, a gesture that spoke of the limits of her generosity. That afternoon, Charles made a series of phone calls that would have surprised his business colleagues. He contacted the local school district to inquire about Miguel's academic support programs. He reached out to a medical clinic he had donated to years earlier, asking about assistance programs for elderly patients. And he arranged for his lawyer to meet with him about establishing something he had never considered before: a personal foundation focused on helping struggling families. 3 days later, Elena arrived at work to find Charles waiting for her with an unusual request. "Elena, I'd like you to invite Miguel and his grandmother for dinner tomorrow evening, here at the house." Elena's eyes widened in surprise. "Mr. Whitmore, they're very simple people. They might feel uncomfortable in such a grand place. Then it's a perfect opportunity for all of us to remember what really matters," Charles replied. "Would you help me plan a meal that would make them feel welcome?" The following evening, Charles found himself nervously adjusting his tie as he waited for his guests. When Elena arrived with Miguel and his grandmother Maria, he was struck by their dignity despite their modest appearance. Maria wore her best dress, clearly pressed for the occasion, and Miguel had combed his hair with extra care. As they sat around Charles's dining room table, a table that had hosted business dinners worth millions, but had never felt as meaningful as it did that night, something beautiful began to unfold. Miguel shared his dreams of becoming a doctor, his eyes bright with possibility. Maria spoke of her homeland with gentle nostalgia and expressed gratitude for Elena's friendship with a grace that humbled Charles. "Miguel," Charles said as they shared dessert, "Elena tells me you're an excellent reader. I have a library upstairs with many books. Would you like to choose some to take home?" The boy's face lit up. "Really? Could I?" Later, as they selected books together, Miguel looked up at Charles with curious eyes. "Mr. Whitmore, why are you being so nice to us?" Charles knelt down to the boy's level, thinking of Elena's example. "Because Elena taught me something important. Miguel, she showed me that the size of your heart matters more than the size of your house." That night, after his guests had left, Charles sat in his study with a different kind of satisfaction than he had ever known. For the first time in years, his house had been filled with laughter, stories, and genuine connection. Over the following months, Charles quietly established a scholarship fund for Miguel's education and arranged for Maria to receive the medical care she needed. But more importantly, he had learned to see his success differently, not as something to hoard, but as something to share. Elena continued to work for Charles, but their relationship had transformed from employer and employee to something approaching family. And every few weeks, Miguel and Maria would join them for dinner, filling the grand house with the simple joy of people who cared for one another. As Charles reflected on the changes in his life, he realized that Elena had given him a gift more valuable than anything his wealth could buy. She had shown him that true richness comes not from what we accumulate, but from what we give away. And in teaching him to see Miguel's worth, she had helped Charles discover his own heart again. Sometimes the greatest teachers come disguised, as those who serve us. And sometimes the most important lessons are learned not in boardrooms, but in moments of quiet compassion witnessed by moonlight.